All right, we are learning the Chovas Halavavas from Rabbeinu Bechaya Shaar Habitochon, the Gate of Trust. We're middle of the introduction, and if you're following along on Chabad.org library, it's towards the end of section 3 of the introduction. So part 3, Misguided. So we're in the middle of talking about the misguided trust the person has in worldly things, and how that's not going to be there for the person in different situations that they may be relying on. So actually, middle of the paragraph over here, we finished off. It says, Jeremiah says that if a person dependency on their ability to provide for themselves, their future, their security is based on material guarantees that they've set up for themselves. So he says, halfway through your life, that could change. Yazvenu means it could leave you. And you're going to be left without that security. So the security that you may means we always try to set up for ourselves as security, and there's no guarantee that security is going to be there. Or he says, Oi, timona mimeno hana'asei boy. You may have it, but you may not be able to enjoy it. It means it may not be there for you for certain things that you need. Like he's bringing quotes down that King Solomon says, Kamayim Rachacham, as the wise person said, God is not going to allow to eat from it. So it says, like it says, God gives him no power to eat from it. He's not going to be able to benefit from it. Doesn't explain why that would be. But the answer he says over here is either someone else is going to have it. He says, we see many times that a person gathers money, let's say, and for other reasons never ends up benefiting from it personally. Right? Whatever that could mean. I mean, something could happen. But the point is that what Rabbeinu Bechai is getting at is that we try to create strategies for survival and security for ourselves that is dependent on us. And so to say, we work out a structure and a system that we feel safe, and we don't know what the end is going to be. We don't know what our needs are going to be. We don't know how it's going to play out. And he says, it says it's going to be only like a deposit by you. And you're going to watch it that it shouldn't get lost, but you're not going to benefit from it. And so to say that God actually is in a place, sometimes a good fortune to you as a deposit, and you're going to watch it and protect it. And then when God sees, when God finds a person, or it's the right time for another person, that it's for that person, and God gives it to the other person. As King Solomon says, and it says, the verse says, and to the sinner, God gives the urge to gather and amass wealth to give to one who is good before God. It means God says, oh, this person is a sinner. He wants to preoccupy themselves in gathering security. They're going to gather security, but it's going to be I'm going to give it to someone else. So that just the fact that you've created a security for yourself doesn't guarantee that's for yourself. God is siba hasibas. God makes things the way He wants it to be, and sometimes willingly or unwillingly, what's really happening is that everything that you're doing is just part of a story of a bigger story for someone else's life. Because God is God and He could do whatever He wants. It says, "Liya kesef, liya zav," all money, all wealth belongs to God. So how God has all the ways and abilities to have things work out the way He wants it to be. He also quotes, it says, verse says, Aaron, I'm going to put on mute because there's some sound coming over. Okay, so it says, "V'yochin," it also brings on "V'yochin v'tzadik yilbash v'kesef naki achlik," and it says the innocent will divide the money among themselves. It means the money that was gathered by the inappropriate person, is going to be divided by other people. He says, he gives an example. He says, Yesh Adam, there are people, there's some people who put together nice clothing with the assumption that it's going to be for their own good use. But at the end of the day, someone else wears them. Where do we see a story like that? Like Purim, right? Purim. So Haman has this whole plan that he's going to be presented to the whole of Shushan, the whole of the capital of the kingdom of King Achashverosh, in this whole glamorous way. He tells Achashverosh, ride him on the horse of the king and have him, someone call out, this is what we do to the person who the king loves. All Haman scheming, and he worked up this whole idea. And Achashverosh says, okay, do that to Mordechai. So you never know what you're preparing. You could be preparing something for someone else. And here he says even more than that. It's possible that everything you've been working towards ends up being your fault. It says, Hamam, the money that you're trying to gather is going to be the cause of the bad that happened, the misfortune that happens to you, and the destruction of your soul. Like it says in Kehelis, he quotes King Solomon, Yesh ra'a choyla re'isi tachas hashemesh, oishe shomer leba'oilav l'rasai. So it translates, there is a sickening evil that I have seen under the sun, riches hoarded by their owner to his own misfortune. So we don't even know sometimes that, again, the securities that we create for ourselves ends up being that it's our downfall. That could be in many, many ways. That could be in a family setting, right? A person a person could have fortune, and that only creates fighting amongst their children, right? And that creates fighting amongst the parents and the children. So we don't even know if the actual fortune that you're trying to create ends up being your misfortune, ends up being something that's negative for you. So for those who are following along in the Chabad.org, we're moving on to part 4 of Introduction, Independence. He says it this. So before we start chapter 4, it says like this. Ad kan Hizber Rabbeinu Bechaya. Again, I'm reading from my publication. Until here, Rabbeinu Bechaya has been explaining to us as hatoyeles harishon shall be tachin, the first point of trust. V'sikuma hu, and the bottom line is Habitochon hi hasimchus muchletes al Hashem. The idea of trust is to place your dependency totally on Hashem, and this is a spiritual obligation. Hamivatos es hakesher elav v'kivan sh'Hashem hu makar habracha, and it expresses your connection to Hashem because God is the source of all blessing, and trusting God brings a person to menuchas hanefesh, tranquility. When you have trust in Hashem, so all outcomes are positive. If you trust on other people or other things, al atzmai, on yourself, al mamoina, on your good fortune, on your money, misnatek mi Hashem kivyachol, like he says, you cut yourself off from Hashem. That could bring to a person misfortune. Meaning, when like we said in the beginning of last week, that when a person places their trust in something else, themselves, their success, another person, God withdraws. God is the rock that we could depend on in every situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome is going to be maybe to our liking in a revealed way, but that's for sure 100% positive. And therefore, the dependency on that is something positive. Dependency on anything else is A, God withdraws, and B, who knows what the end outcome is going to be. Now he goes into the next level of what he calls in the Chabad.org independence. Because when we have another idea that's in trusting God, Shabaiteach al Hashem, when one trusts in Hashem, Yiviyehu habitochon alav shloi lihisrapes lizulase. When a person trusts in Hashem, so it brings the person to not serve any other entity. Lisrapes means to not serve anyone else. Like he says, Adam she'ein boi bitachim b'Hashem, a person who doesn't trust in God, ne'elatz harbapam, many times because you trust in other things or other people. You have to submit to other people. If you trust in another person, so you submit to that person because now your dependency is on that person. If your boss is the one who decides your fortune, it doesn't mean you have to be a arrogant person or an unpleasant person. But a lot of times we compromise our integrity because we place our trust in another person. And we think that person's liking us or the person's or us finding favor in that person or that thing is going to be the dependence of our outcome. And therefore we compromise to because we're relying on that person, let's say. So he explains over here, a person doesn't trust in God. So many times he or she has to submit themselves to other people. You become subjugated to them. Hashem hu marker ha'oitzma ha'pnimis, and we should zoynech as a bitachon boy. God is the absolute internal dependency, and a person who places their dependence on Hashem, so you don't lose your independence. A person who trusts God will never place themselves in a situation where they have to compromise who they are because of the other person. If you trust in Hashem, meaning something like, for instance, it could express itself in many levels. If a person says, you have to work on Shabbos or I'm going to fire you. There are people who used to have 6-day jobs. They'd be hired in those days on Sunday, and they'd get fired Friday afternoon when they said they're not going to show up on Shabbos, or Sunday morning, they had no job anymore because they kept Shabbos. And their bosses those days in the 20s, in the days of the recession, if you didn't work on Shabbos, you got fired. There's people who literally had jobs from week to week. But it never occurred to them to say, well, I have to work on Shabbos. Because Hashem says we don't work on Shabbos. So, I mean, that's an extreme case, but there's other cases where people compromise what's important to them. Or even if they're not being truthful in their relationships with other people because they're just trying to find favor in that other person because they depend on that person. But you could imagine you're able to have a real conversation with someone because you don't want anything from that person. You know, a lot of people that end up becoming successful in life, they end up finding themselves to be very lonely. Why? Because all the people that are around them want something from them. So what happens is it starts to dwell on the person that people are depending on, that they don't know him or they don't like him or they don't have to do with him or her. They just want what they feel that this person can help them with. So they start feeling lonely because they just not happy. They don't have any real relationships with people. And you'll have one person that won't want anything from them. All they want to do is, is be their friend. And that person could be on a much lower level, but the person realizes that at least this person's honest with me. It's an honest relationship. And that's how it is if you have proper trust in Hashem. It's not just that you're having proper trust in Hashem. It helps in who you are as a person. It helps who you are in your relationship with other people. Because you have trust in Hashem, and therefore you have the ability to be truthful with other people. And therefore, when it comes to a situation where you have to say something that has to be said, you say it. And if it comes to a situation that you don't want to participate in something, you don't participate. And when it comes to a moment of joy that you want to participate in this person's simcha, you mean it, right? You show up at the wedding, you're dancing because you really care for this person. So the Rabbeinu Machai says like this. Like it says, you don't place your hope in another person. Like this is, he's quoting, he's paraphrasing from a verse. And he says, you place your hope, all right? He won't place hope in man or expect anything from other people. You're not going to serve them. You're not going to be subservient to them. You're not going to flatter them. You're not going to try to get them to like you because you want something from them because you don't feel dependent on them because you have your dependencies on Hashem. He says here he uses the word v'layachzer aleim. Here he says leichanef. The wording is not exactly that I have the same. He says and you'll not agree or spend time with him in things that are not related to serving Hashem. I have a different, the wording is not always the same. So he says over here that it says over here like this. It says, Lo yichazer achreim, you're not going to chase them. So he says, Yesh adam, there are sometimes a person. Shemechazer lo yiheref achrei nashim acherim. You're constantly chasing other people. Mushtad limtza chen beineim. You always want to find favor in their eyes because you feel they could give you something. You want to have a relationship with them. Hasiba amukal hisnalis kazais. Why does a person behave this way? He had there's a kifas kaima penimis. So here he's going into a deeper problem in the personality of the person who's dependent. When a person is dependent on someone else, you're lacking self-respect. When you need someone else's acknowledgement or help in a way that the person is not giving you anything even really, the person is just acknowledging you. So you're missing a backbone. Adam shechasra is a kifas kazois benasa kol azman nimtza ha'erech ha'atzmi shaloi b'toich yachas al cherem klapav. And he says it's not just about getting money from people or getting security from people. It's also getting recognition from people. If you need others to acknowledge you or to pat you on the back or to tell you that what you're doing is right and you're a good person, so a lot of us need that support. No one's saying we don't get support from others, but if you depend on that your self-value is all based on other people's relationships. I was talking about it before in another class with children. Unfortunately, you see that where friendships are very important to the children, and very easily another child could bring crashing down a friend's or another classmate's self-confidence, because their self-confidence is all built on the relationship with their friends. When the friends have the tools and the ability to bring that crashing down. And so therefore again, we teach our kids as they get older to have independence and to have security. But if a person lives their whole life like that, it means when they grow up as adults, they haven't changed from how they were as children, where they constantly need others to acknowledge and justify who they are. So you become emotionally dependent on other people. And here the Rabbeinu Bachai is saying that by having a solid relationship and a healthy relationship with Hashem, you have a healthy relationship with other people. When you're in a solid place with you and God, and you're comfortable with yourself and you're comfortable with your relationship with Hashem, so then your relationship with other people is not that they're building you up or they're holding up your spine, but it's a healthy relationship where there's two people in a healthy relationship, not one person that's supporting the other person emotionally. Now, sometimes we go through situations where we need that friend to be our support, but it can't be that we become that's our sole support of who we are, and that happens when a person who doesn't have a relationship with Hashem, doesn't have the trust in Hashem, doesn't have the dependency on Hashem, and therefore you need others to build you up and to support who you are. And he says, "V'layachish lahem." Let me see a second. I'm looking at two publications here. Almost like the reading is really different. I'm going to go with what I have here. And therefore, you're not going to be dragged into things because you have self-dependence and clarity. You're not going to be dragged into social pressure to do things that are not in a way of serving Hashem. And a person who has true self-confidence and Habitochon and trust in Hashem, and doesn't spend their whole life trying to find favor in other people's eyes, has an ability to know when, is not scared to argue with other person. I'm not talking about making fights. I'm talking about saying, from the word lachlek aleim, to say this is not something I want to participate in, or what you guys are doing is wrong. So a strong person and a confident person knows when to call out when a situation is not right. Eliis artel miksus chazdehem v'choivas taidasam v'atzorich ligmolahem. The person who trusts in Hashem gets out of this enclosed environment where there's an obligation to constantly acknowledging constantly being thankful, constantly compromising on who you are as a person, because you're both emotional and financial or material support is based on other people. And therefore you're constantly involved in things and acknowledging things that maybe you don't believe in, and you're not being truthful. It says in the Hayom Yom of today, meaning Thursday, that the idea is not, it's an amazing Hayom Yom from the Rebbe. It says, the idea of truth is not that your service to God should be truthful, but that truth itself is a service. And truth doesn't mean just that you should be truthful with God, but truthful with everyone. Meaning to say is that be truthful to yourself, who you are. Be truthful to what matters to you. And if you have things that are important to you, be true to yourself. Even if it's not popular, even if it's not going to get you an invitation to someone's home or to a social party, but be truthful, and that confidence you have to be sometimes going the other direction where the crowd is going is when you have dependence, true bitachon in Hashem. The kasher yoichicham, he says, and when you're going to admonish people that are doing something wrong, because you're not dependent on them, so you're able to call them out. Lo yishamar behem, you're not going to be concerned of the outcome, not because you're arrogant again, but because you're not dependent on them. You're dependent on Hashem. He says the idea is not to embarrass other people, but when you have to say something, you're not going to be embarrassed to say something you have to say. Like again, the wording is really off between the two publications I have, but he says it over here. If you're going to have to rebuke them, you're not going to be careful of their honor. And if you shame them, so you will not be embarrassed that you had to say something, and you won't praise them in a false way.
But what if it's your parents?
So a very good question, Aaron. Very good question, because that's an excellent question. Because sometimes, especially with our parents, we have challenges as we even get older, when they try to put you down on the choices you've made in life. You have to go through a self-evaluation and make sure that you're coming from the right place. It means that you're not angry. It's very hard sometimes. What happens, especially with parents, with close relatives, children, whatever, is or close friends, is we mix in hurt and anger and upset in our conversation. So we're hurt because it's personal to your parents, or you're hurt or you're upset because it's someone close to you, or and when that comes mixed into the conversation, it's clear. I mean, the people who are on the other side of this conversation hear it. They hear that you're upset. They hear that you're offended. So you have to kind of sit down with yourself and get clear in the conversation. What is it that you're trying to say that's not connected to being hurtful, unless you want to talk about being hurtful? But if you're arguing about an idea, if let's say your parents don't want you to do something or don't acknowledge what you're doing is important, so you have to be able to separate the conversation. You could talk about the hurt separate from the argument of if this is the right path I want to be taking. But when you get to that and you're clear that it's not coming from the wrong place on your side, so you have that conversation. If you can't, then you don't have the conversation. Not always you can have the conversation. So when it says to rebuke, like, and you have to also be smart. If you decided to become frum, religious, God-fearing, and you want to shame your parents who haven't made that choice yet. I'm not talking about you, I'm saying in theory. You want to shame your parents who haven't made that choice yet and show them how they're wrong. That's not being smart, and that's not being fair. So you have to also use common sense and the right way. But sometimes if you have to say something that's direct, and you're comfortable that it's coming from the right energy, then you say it. So he continues, he says, K'maisha Amar Navi, as the prophet says, Hashem Elikim Ya'azer Li Al Kain. This is from Isaiah. Hashem Elikim Ya'azer Li. God, my Lord, is going to help me Al kain loy nichlamti, that's why I will not be shamed. Al kain samti panai, I put my face kechalamish, like a flintstone, which is protecting the flame. The eidak le'ayvesh, and I know I will not be embarrassed. And this is really what I was just answering to you, Aaron, that this is a private conversation. You know that God is with you. And you know that if this is the path, you have to have an honest conversation with yourself. So you have to really break it down with yourself. But then you know that it's not going to be shame. It means it doesn't change what the person is going to say or respond to you, but it changes how you take it and how you feel about it. For Omar, he quotes Yecheskel that says, Al tira miham, do not be fear from them. Umi divrayim al tira, and don't be fearful from their words. So there's being fearful from people and there's being fearful from what they're going to tell you. For Omar, he quotes again from Yecheskel, Mi divrayim al tira, umi pneim al techas. And he says also that fear not their words and do not dismayed, but don't be put off by them. Teachas. And also says also means a way of fear. Also says al tir mipneim. He quotes Yirmiyahu says don't be fearful for them, and he quotes al techas mipneim. Also don't be in a way the way chitas alikim kind of overwhelmed by them. He quotes Yecheskel again and says ki shomer. Shomer was a kind of insect or worm that seems very small but it's very strong and was able to cut stone. So it says kishamar chazak, like a strong shamir. Mitzor nasati mitzchecha. So so he quotes, he says, as a shamir stronger than flint, I have set your forehead, and do not fear them and do not be intimidated by them. So we see that there's mitzcha means your forehead, means your expression. So this different languages of the person who's when you have trust in Hashem, you have the confidence to have inner strength. Yeah, I just want to say that the name Shamir is, again, it's this kind of worm that's very strong. When Yitzchak Shamir in the late 80s was facing tremendous pressure from the world with regard to compromising on things that are important to Klal Yisrael. He was the prime minister then, and they were putting a lot of pressure on him to make compromises on Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe told him, your name is Shamir, and Shamir means a very strong, it may look like a worm, but it's very strong, like he quotes over here. So you have to be very strong when it comes to pressure, that you don't give in to the pressure. But again, see, the challenge is not just, the challenge is also inside. You have to be very clear that the path you're taking is right. And part of that, what Rabbeinu Bachai is telling us is that the confidence we have is by placing our trust in Hashem. That what Rabbeinu Bachai is getting at is that you can't have it both ways. You can't have two crutches. You can't have one crutch where you place your trust in other things, people, situations, society, etc., and then another crutch that you're taking support from Hashem, because then you have support from no one. So either you place your total support. Again, we're not talking about trust only about that Hashem is going to help you pay your bills, but your trust in life. And by trusting in Hashem, you're trusting yourself. Really, you become a person that is strong. And it may not be easy. No one's saying it's easy. And it may be you're going to have conversations. Everything he quoted from Isaiah, Yeches, and Yirmiyahu are all conversations that you're having with people that in theory could hurt you. Meaning to hurt you is that their words could hurt you, their opinions could hurt you, their views of you could hurt you. And the prophet is saying, be strong. Because you need the strength. And where do you draw strength from? When you have absolute dependence in Hashem. Absolute dependence in Hashem is knowing clearly this is the right thing that I have to do. And it's not about being arrogant. It's not about being disrespectful. It's not about being an annoying person. It's just about being strong with yourself. And therefore, if you have to say something, you say it. If you don't participate in something, you don't participate.
Alexa, set an alarm for 6:30 a.m.
And you have the ability to know the right thing at the right time, what to do. So he continues. Okay. So he continues. We're going to go to chapter 5 of the introduction. We'll go a little further. He says, chapter 5, he says, is peace of mind. Here, look at this. Before we get to chapter 5 of the introduction, I want to read what I have over here, the summary of what we've said up until now. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and translate. He says like this. The sikum, to summarize what we just discussed. One of the benefits for a person who places their trust in God, the trust acquires, makana means from the word kinyan, acquires for the person to be calm and to have inner tranquility, inner calmness. And frees the person. Placing your trust and your integrity in other people. The one who trusts in God, Chosh ben Chayim, feels like a free person. He's able to express himself with confidence and in a healthy way and doesn't feel like he's submitting himself to anyone. A lot of people tell you when a person chooses to live a life of Torah, how are you listening to God, and how are you becoming brainwashed, and how are you becoming small and limited? All the arguments. And the truth is, it says, the Gemara says, it's brought down, Ein ben chorim, there's no free person like a person who learns Torah. Because everyone depends on someone or something. So what is that argument really saying when they say, oh, now you're just, so what do you depend on? What makes you happy? What drives your decisions in life? When I trust in Hashem, and Hashem is the giving, loving God, the truthful God, I have the ability to say whatever I want. I'm the most comfortable person with myself. I'm the freest person. I feel I can express myself in any situation. How comfortable are you to stand up to your social circles and say what you really feel? How comfortable are you? Do you take your yarmulke off when you gather amongst your non-Jewish friends? Are you comfortable with your identity? Right? So a lot of people who argue the argument, oh, you became a person, a religious person. The person who places their trust in Hashem, we're not talking about a religious person. A lot of people who live a life of Torah who struggle with bitachon, with trust. A person who places their trust in Hashem, he says that's a ben chorim, that's a true free person. You're free to actually say what you want because you're comfortable with yourself. You're comfortable with what you think. You're comfortable with your views, and you're actually not dependent on anyone. You don't feel dependent on anyone. You don't feel dependent on people, on society. And you're not to be arrogant, but at least you're comfortable and you don't feel pressure to do things you're not uncomfortable with. Regia zu, he says, this calmness, he says, chashuva b'yaiser is very important. For a person's spiritual service of Hashem. It allows the person to fulfill their mission in this world without being overwhelmed or threatened or embarrassed from other people, and to feel submitted to what they feel is right. I'm going to go out on Shabbos together with other people. I'm going to do things that are not in an appropriate situation for me right now. Any decision that you make that's under pressure, social pressure, the person who has true trust in Hashem doesn't suffer from that. He continues. I'm going to actually finish off with this, and we'll start the next paragraph next week. He says, HaRebbe Masber, the Rebbe explains in one of his talks that the verse that says in Micha, that those who are left over from the people of Yaakov amongst the nations, they're not going to place their hope in others. They're not going to be dependent on other people. So the Rebbe says, this is talking about literally our times, the beginning of the times of redemption. We're no longer going to have to rely on the nature of things. We're going to place our trust totally in God. The Rebbe talks over there. How do we get ready for the geula, for the redemption? It has to be in such a way where we strengthen our bitachon in God and not our nature and other people. I mean, what's going on today in the world, where I'm not saying again, not that you have to make wrong choices or arrogant choices, but one thing we see clearly that we can't depend on anyone. The Jewish people can't depend on anyone. And the Rebbe says that Micha, the prophet Micha, said this is the way it's going to be in the times of redemption, where the Jewish people are going to have to come to realize that we have to depend on ourselves. Our survival is dependent on that. Today, I mean, our survival as the Jewish people in Galus, in exile, what's going on in the anti-Semitism in the world, and the security of Eretz Yisrael now that we live in here now. It is all dependent. If we're going to rely on other people, we're not going to be around anymore. I'm not saying we have to be arrogant and stick our finger in other people's eyes, but we have to place our trust in Hashem. The Rebbe says, the author over here says, we have to live a life of redemption and try to infuse an attitude of redemption to lead up to the coming of Mashiach. A person has to strengthen their inner core, Habitochon in our trust in God and our dependency, and stop depending on other people. We have to be respectful, but not in a way that we depend and make choices that are dependent on other people's goodwill, where other people are going to protect us, other people are going to help us. He finishes off this chapter, and this is a good ending to this idea in general, as the Jewish people as a whole, or individuals like Aaron, you asked, as people who are dealing with situations. Be sensitive to other people. Yes. But to be affected by other people, don't. Be sensitive, be kind, but to make choices based on things that are, because other people are pressuring you, or that your dependency on them, that's something we don't do. We have dependence on Hashem, and the security of us as people, and the security of the Jewish people as a whole, and Eretz Yisrael specifically, is not going to come from any kind of outside power. It's going to come from how Hashem is going to show his strength in the protection of the Jewish people. We're going to stop over here, Chevra. And Hashem, next week we're going to pick up. We're holding part 5 of the introduction. Again, I have to go over. I didn't realize that my publication is so different than the publication online. I'm not sure why. I have to check into that. But either way, Laila Tov, everyone, and have a good week, and we'll see you next week in this class. Take care.